This very short lecture is going to be over an important part of the 1920s and the Roaring Twenties, even though it happens a little bit before it, but is women's suffrage. The women gain the right to vote pretty much in the 20s. It's going to be a major shift in America because it's totally going to change elections. So we're going to kind of throw it in with the 1920s as part of that idea that society was changing a lot. There was a lot of shifts in politics, social norms, and the economy even. So what we're going to do here, we're going to try to understand the meaning of the 19th Amendment, which gets added to the U.S. Constitution, and then we're going to talk about a little bit of the background of how women gain this right to vote. So one of the big things in the United States was before women got the right to vote, they were under what was called coverture. This is a legal status where women were considered to be under the protection of their father or their husband. So it was kind of like the idea that women needed to be taken care of. In more extreme areas of the world, this wasn't just an American thing. It could be that women weren't even allowed to own property. Women weren't allowed to marry without their father's permission. In some countries, this is still kind of a thing. Like, women can't leave the house without a male relative or their husband escorting them. So this was kind of the norm originally, but we see that as the Industrial Revolution starts to advance in the United States, this slowly begins to change. So for most of history, the sexes were separated into different spheres. There was a male sphere of life and there was a female sphere. What we call the public sphere, that was men. Public life was a man's world. Business, government, it was seen as the proper place. The man went outside of the home, they worked, they brought home money, the men ran the government, the men made the important decisions. The domestic sphere, which at home, was women's place. Home and church, taking care of the children, making sure that the spiritual life of the family is kind of attended to, and generally supporting the home. Now, this wasn't originally a thing. It wasn't like an oppression thing. It was actually mostly due to, remember, a lot of throughout history, taking care of a home was a full-time job. There was not the labor-saving devices like washing machines and dishwashers and dryers that we have now. Food had to be prepared from scratch every single day. So a lot of times this was just something that was done. Work was a lot more physical back then, so men kind of took on more of that. But as we see, the Industrial Revolution begins to change everything. Women get more education. Women began to have those labor-saving devices at home, so they have more time. And this is an anti-women's suffrage cartoon. The idea was that men would have to take care of everything because women would just get involved in politics and they wouldn't want to do their jobs at home, according to some of the anti-suffragettes back then. So coverture pretty much had died out in the United States. It wasn't a popular thing. Women could own property in the United States pretty much from the beginning. Women owned property. Women got the right to divorce by the mid-1800s. Before this, women had to request a divorce from their husband, which you can imagine did not go very well usually. So women had, in some ways, more rights than most women did in the old world, Europe and things like that, but still, there was not the right to vote. The Industrial Revolution has a big change in that women start working. And not just working class women, women who were in the poorer classes, they had always worked. But we start to see middle class women begin to work. They begin to work as teachers. They begin to work as nurses. They begin to work as secretaries. Like some of the jobs that are now considered more traditionally held by women begin to get very popular during this time period. With that, with money comes independence. Women did not have to rely on their father or their husband now. They had money. They could do what they wanted. More women slowly begin to get into higher education. Higher education meaning colleges, universities, getting degrees in engineering, politics, philosophy, things like that. What happens is these advances are because the 14th Amendment, which granted citizenship specifically to African Americans, gets applied to women as well. The idea that they are citizens as well, they have the same opportunities as men. So we see the extension of this amendment to women. Slowly, women begin to campaign for the right to vote. So the Seneca Falls Convention was held at a church in 1848, and the goal of it was to discuss two things. One, it was an anti-slavery meeting. Most of the suffragettes during this time period, the women who campaigned for the right to vote, were highly anti-slavery, and they wanted women's suffrage. Suffrage, again, meaning the right to vote. They began to organize a campaign that slowly spread across the United States. There were different parties that kind of did this, and many states began extending the right to vote to these women. So if we see here in this quote, this is Elizabeth Cady Stanton. She's one of the original suffragettes. Her, Susan B. Anthony. So if you are looking for something to do for a project, or you're looking for something to examine in more depth, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony are both very important suffragettes. They kind of led the campaign. If you're looking for somebody who was a little bit more of a radical and a little bit more aggressive, Alice Paul led a group of women who would go on hunger strikes and were much more aggressive with the government, trying to get the right to vote. So they're interesting. But as you can see from this, the women, what they thought was that they're doing the same things as men. They're not getting, they pay taxes. They work in the country. They have their own property. Why are they not getting the right to vote? And that's kind of their argument, is that we are equal citizens. If we're going to be considered equal, we should get the right to vote as well. This all ends in the 19th Amendment. So in 1920, the 19th Amendment is passed, and it says that the right to vote shall not be denied or abridged on account of sex. So male and female can both vote. This let women vote in all elections across the country. Like I said before, some of the states had let women vote in elections on their own, but this lets women vote in presidential United States elections. And what this does is it completely changes the political makeup of the United States. You have to keep in mind that originally only 50% of the population could vote. Only men could vote. Suddenly, a whole other 50% of the population opens up for voting. This is going to make women's issues much more outspoken to politicians. They now have to listen to women issues. The best example of this is if the 19th Amendment was never passed, abortion would probably not be an issue. Because why would politicians focus on it? Focus on an issue that primarily affects women if women can't vote. So it completely changes the makeup of the country. It kind of contributes to that whole thing we're looking at the 1920s of the country is radically changing socially, economically, in all ways. If you need any help understanding this anymore, or you're looking for someone to do a project or some research on any of the suffragettes, you can come and see me, and I would be glad to help.